A humble paralytic widow was publicly rejected and excluded from the community, left completely alone to grieve the loss of her husband. But when a massive, intimidating member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club rode up to her home, everyone expected the worst. Instead, the biker approached her wheelchair and whispered 3 unexpected words, leading to a moment of pure shock and incredible generosity that changed her life forever. The metallic scent of the wheelchair's polished frame often filled the small apartment, a constant sharp reminder for Eleanor Vance. 6 months had passed since the accident, a blur of screeching tires and cold asphalt that had meticulously re-engineered her life below the waist. The T12 complete paralysis, diagnosed with a clinical detachment that echoed the severity of her new reality, confined her existence to the narrow confines of her chair and the even narrower confines of an emotional landscape she barely recognized. Physical pain, a dull, throbbing companion, was a lesser shadow compared to the lacerating agony of the soul, the quiet hum of guilt, the public sting of humiliation. Nathaniel, the man who had woven visions of a stable future, had vanished in her most vulnerable hour. His flight was not even direct. It was orchestrated through the cold, bureaucratic proxy of his own godfather, a messenger of his moral bankruptcy, delivering a verdict of overwhelming responsibility that pulverized Eleanor's belief in herself and in love itself. She was, in her own estimation, a fractured relic. Her days were measured in the laborious turning of wheels, the slow, deliberate negotiation of door frames, and the silent, inward cataloguing of all that had been lost. The world outside, once a vibrant tapestry, now seemed a distant, unattainable canvas, glimpsed through the window panes that framed her constrained view. Each sunrise brought not renewal, but a fresh appraisal of her limitations, a stark inventory of lost grace and unfulfilled promises. The echoes of Peter's easy laughter, now a phantom sound, resonated in the quiet corners of her memory, amplifying the void left by his absence. She traced the lines on her palms, seeking reassurance in the familiar topography of her own skin, but found only the stark, unyielding truth of her changed form. The sense of being perpetually observed, judged by an unseen tribunal of expectation and able-bodied privilege, pressed down on her, a weight heavier than the chair itself. The ultimate rupture, however, unfolded not within the sanctuary of a home, but amidst the rugged, resonant chaos of an antique vehicle restoration workshop. This space, theoretically dedicated to the resurrection of forgotten beauty and the promise of new beginnings, became the stage for Nathaniel's final cowardly act. The air hung thick with the pungent aroma of grease, solvent, and freshly polished metal, each scent a stark counterpoint to the decaying promise of their union. He had stood there, an outline against the glow of a welding torch, silhouetted not by love, but by the oppressive weight of impending obligation. Nathaniel, choked by the prospect of becoming a caretaker rather than a husband, articulated the bitter logic of his pity. His voice, strained and low, was swallowed by the workshop's ambient clatter, the rhythmic tap of a hammer, the distant whine of a grinder. He spoke of insurmountable pressures, of a future he hadn't envisioned, words that felt less like an apology and more like a carefully rehearsed capitulation. He did not meet her gaze, his eyes darting to the floor, to the tools hanging precisely on a pegboard, anywhere but her face. Then, as suddenly as a broken spring, he was gone, retreating through a back entrance that led to a narrow alley, a path designed for quick, unseen exits. He left behind a single engagement ring, glinting with a desolate brilliance on a dusty workbench, a solitary testament to a love that had corroded under the harsh light of adversity. His departure was not a farewell, but a raw, unvarnished cry of relief, a guttural declaration of his own inadequacy. Eleanor, now twice widowed, first by fate, then by cowardice, processed the abandonment with a dignity that bordered on the tragic. Her public humiliation, a quiet spectacle witnessed by the handful of mechanics who avoided eye contact, was the heaviest burden laid upon her lap. She felt the silent, collective gasp of judgment, a wave of pity and scorn that washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Her breath caught, a small involuntary hitch in her chest, but no tears fell. Her face, a mask of composed sorrow, revealed nothing of the storm raging within. This was not a moment for breakdown. It was a moment for silent registration, a brutal assimilation of new, devastating data. The workshop, once a place of potential, now echoed with the hollow clang of shattered trust, each metallic sound a resonant reminder of her profound isolation. The community's murmurs of judgment followed her, a relentless drone that reverberated through the ancient stone walls of a small chapel one rain-lashed afternoon. The ceremony, intended to consecrate a bond, transformed instead into a stage for thinly veiled derision, hushed whispers and pitying glances that pierced deeper than any explicit condemnation. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and stale incense, a suffocating mix that intensified the oppressive atmosphere. Eleanor sat, a figure of quiet resilience, her gaze fixed on the altar, on a flickering candle that seemed to mimic the fragile flame of her own hope. Each rustle of fabric, each shifting foot, felt like an accusation, a collective agreement that her fate was sealed, her life irrevocably diminished. The weight of their unspoken pronouncements pressed down, a stifling blanket of social conformity and quiet cruelty. It was at this precise, suffocating juncture that the chapel door, ancient and heavy, swung inward with a sudden force, propelled by a gust of wind that carried the scent of rain and distant thunder. Framed in the doorway stood the formidable figure of Silas Thorne. He was a man of imposing mass, clad in the worn leather and insignia of a motorcycle club, his presence a violent contrast to the solemnity of the setting. Silas, a former naval combat engineer, carried the silent, weighty guilt of those who had returned from conflict zones, haunted by the survival that had eluded others. He sought only momentary refuge from the tempest outside, a brief sanctuary from the pelting rain and the churning darkness within himself. His entrance, abrupt and commanding, momentarily silenced the room's hushed judgments, drawing all eyes to his unexpected form. His piercing blue eyes, however, did not linger on the gossiping congregation, nor did they betray any awareness of the social tableau. Instead, they settled with an unwavering intensity upon Eleanor, fixed on the unbreakable dignity that radiated from the grieving woman. He perceived the raw shame of betrayal mingling with her quiet stoicism, a paradox of vulnerability and strength that resonated with something deep within him. In that moment of brutal moral clarity, Silas moved. He approached, his heavy boots making barely a sound on the ancient flagstones, deliberately cutting through the suffocating fabric of public humiliation. His voice, a low, gravelly rasp, firm and resonant, sliced through the stifling air of judgment. It was not mere gallantry he offered, but something far more profound, a declaration of unyielding loyalty, a code of conduct forged in the crucible of battle, hardened by experiences that few understood. "I don't abandon anyone when they're in trouble," he stated, his words a quiet, unwavering vow that settled over the silent assembly like a sudden protective shield. It was not a question, but a statement of immutable principle, a promise woven from an integrity forged in fire. His words, a stone dropped into the quiet pool of judgment, created ripples that spread through the chapel, challenging the unspoken assumptions that had settled like dust. The collective gasp that had followed his entrance now morphed into an awkward silence, punctuated only by the relentless drumming of rain against the stained glass windows. Eleanor, still fixed on the altar, felt the shift in the room's energy, a sudden crack in the suffocating edifice of pity and disdain. Her gaze, however, remained unwavering, a testament to a dignity so profound it bordered on defiance. She sensed Silas Thorne's proximity, a formidable and unexpected presence, without needing to turn. It wasn't the chivalry of a bygone era he offered, but the blunt, unvarnished integrity of a man who understood codes, loyalties, and the raw, inescapable truth of human struggle. His statement, "I don't abandon anyone when they're in trouble," wasn't an invitation to romance, but a stark, undeniable challenge to the community's moral failings, a direct refutation of Nathaniel's cowardly retreat. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Eleanor, not of fear, but of recognition. It was the sudden, sharp awareness of a crossroads she hadn't anticipated, a path diverging from the predictable trajectory of quiet decline. The offer wasn't for comfort, but for a choice she hadn't realized was still available. The scent of worn leather and rain-soaked air, carried by Silas, seemed to cut, Through the cloying sweetness of the chapel's old wood and faded flowers, a grounding, earthy aroma that spoke of the outside world, of movement, of untamed landscapes. It was a visceral call to something beyond the confines of her physical limitations and the suffocating judgment of those around her. The silent questions in the room were palpable. Who was this man? What did he want? But for Eleanor, the questions were different. What did she want? What did this unexpected intrusion mean for the carefully constructed walls of her resignation? She felt a stirring, not of hope, which felt too fragile a concept, but of a dormant will, a quiet strength that had been buried beneath layers of grief and humiliation. It was a flicker, a spark, in the deepest recesses of her being, challenging the narrative of defeat that had been imposed upon her. The ceremony, now utterly derailed, dissolved into a hurried, embarrassed scattering of attendees. They avoided Eleanor's gaze, their faces etched, with a peculiar mix of curiosity, discomfort, and perhaps a flicker of newfound shame. Silas Thorne, a silent sentinel, remained. His presence was not intimidating, but resolute, an anchor in the chaotic emotional currents that swirled around Eleanor. He did not speak again, nor did he press. He simply was, offering not words, but a silent, unwavering commitment to his stated principle. Eleanor, finally turning her head, met his gaze. His eyes, the startling blue of a deep ocean, held no pity, no judgment, only a quiet, steadfast acknowledgement of her strength, of her dignity. It was a gaze that saw beyond the wheelchair, beyond the recent betrayal, straight into the core of her resilient spirit. It was in that shared, unspoken moment that a fragile connection was forged, not of sentimentality but of mutual understanding. Two souls, weathered by different storms, recognizing a shared code of endurance. Later, away from the prying eyes of the chapel, Eleanor's friend, Clara, offered the path of least resistance. Clara, whose intentions were undeniably kind, spoke of practicality, the readily accessible car, the cushioned comfort of its interior, the engineered ease of a custom-built ramp for her chair. She painted a picture of security, of predictable routines, of a life sheltered from the harsh edges of the world. Clara's voice was soft, laced with a concern that, while genuine, also carried the subtle undertone of resignation to Eleanor's perceived fate. It was a well-meaning attempt to contain, to protect, to define Eleanor's future within the comfortable, albeit restrictive, boundaries of what society deemed appropriate for a woman in her condition. The ramp, to Clara, symbolized freedom from struggle. To Eleanor, it began to feel like another form of confinement, a mechanical extension of her new, narrowed existence. As Clara spoke, Eleanor's mind replayed Silas's resonant words in the chapel. "I don't abandon anyone when they're in trouble." The contrast was stark. One offered a cushioned cage, the other, an unvarnished declaration of solidarity. She looked at Clara, seeing the genuine care, but also recognizing the fear that shaped her friend's vision. A fear of the unknown, of the unconventional, of anything that deviated from the carefully prescribed path. Eleanor understood the allure of that safety, the quiet temptation of a life designed to minimize discomfort. But deep within her, a different kind of calculation was taking place. She realized that this safety was merely another facet of conformity, another layer in the ongoing process of her diminishment. It was a protection that stifled, a comfort that confined. The soft hum of Clara's car, waiting patiently outside, suddenly sounded like the gentle purr of a trap. Eleanor made a decision, not with grand pronouncements, but with the quiet, unshakable resolve that had characterized her throughout her ordeal. She gently but firmly rejected the ramp, the symbol of engineered accessibility that suddenly felt like a barrier. She rejected Clara's well-intentioned embrace, realizing that true support didn't mean cushioning every fall, but empowering the choice to stand or to ride despite them. Her gaze found Silas Thorne, who had followed them, waiting patiently, a solid, unmoving presence. He stood beside his customized cruiser motorcycle, a machine of raw power and untamed spirit, its chrome glinting dully in the overcast light. The bike itself was a statement, a defiance of speed limits, a symbol of journeys unscripted. It was loud, unapologetic, and promised a very different kind of freedom than Clara's quiet sedan. Her choice was radical, not for its grandiosity, but for its quiet, unwavering conviction. She chose Silas. She chose the unknown, the brutal freedom of the open road, the visceral rumble of an engine beneath her. It was a conscious rejection of the predictable, the protected, the path laid out for her by others. It was a decision to trade the suffocating safety of a defined, limited existence for the vibrant, exhilarating adventure of the unmapped. The vision that unfolded next was one that etched itself into the collective memory of the few who witnessed it. Eleanor, the recently abandoned widow, the paralytic woman now firmly secured in the pillion seat of Silas Thorne's formidable cruiser. Her hands, perhaps hesitant at first, found purchase on his leather-clad waist. The rain, still falling, seemed to wash away not just the grime of the road, but the residue of past hurts, of societal expectations. The rumble of the engine, a deep, resonant growl, filled the air. It wasn't just a sound, it was a promise, a heartbeat of impending motion, a declaration of intent. As the motorcycle pulled away, slicing through the rain-slicked streets, Eleanor looked back, not with regret, but with a serene resolve. The small town, with its judgmental murmurs and pitying glances, receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking into a distant, inconsequential speck. Her departure with the taciturn biker was a final, undeniable act of defiance against the destiny others had imposed upon her. It was the moment she traded a paralyzing security for a vibrant, untamed adventure, a silent roar against a world that had tried to silence her. The sheer audacity of her choice, the powerful symbiosis of her fragile form and the brute strength of the machine, of her broken spirit and Silas's unwavering presence, forged a new narrative not just for her but for any who bore witness. This was not an escape, it was an ascension. The wind, even in the rain, felt like an embrace, a cleansing force against her face. She leaned into the turn, into the unknown, into her future. The road ahead, a ribbon of possibility unwinding under the grey Wyoming sky, was hers, and Silas Thorne, a silent, unwavering pillar of strength, was her chosen guide. Their journey had begun, not as a flight, but as a deliberate, powerful, choosing of a new, unbound existence. It was a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit to find liberation not despite, but often because, of its wounds. She felt the vibrations of the powerful engine through her entire body, a sensation of life, of raw, unadulterated existence that had been absent for far too long. 3 days later, the past, a stubborn spectre, attempted to reassert its claim. The chapel, now quiet and empty, save for the echoing silence of memory, witnessed Nathaniel's return. He stood at the threshold, a meticulously chosen bouquet of pale roses clutched in his hands, their delicate scent a stark contrast to the lingering smell of damp earth and faded regret. His face, etched with a theatrical remorse, bore the faint lines of sleepless nights, a contrived penitence designed to elicit sympathy. He had come, not for understanding, but for absolution, to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, a life of predictable comfort, unburdened by the complexities of Eleanor's new reality. His plea, delivered with a rehearsed cadence, framed his abandonment as a forgivable lapse, a momentary weakness born of overwhelming pressure rather than a deliberate act of moral cowardice. He spoke of second chances, of promises that could be mended, of a future he was now supposedly ready to face. He imagined a scene of tearful reconciliation, a narrative where his return was the triumphant climax, not the desperate, ill-timed footnote it truly was. He searched for Eleanor, his eyes sweeping the empty pews, the space where she had sat, dignified and wounded only days before. He expected her to be there, waiting, a broken bird eager for the familiar cage. But Eleanor Vance, no longer the fractured relic he had so easily discarded, was not there. She was miles away, the vast, untamed expanses of a high desert plateau unfolding around her, each mile a silent testament to a journey of fierce self-reclamation. When Nathaniel finally tracked her, down not in the quaint village but in the bustling, impersonal expanse of a roadside diner, surrounded by the transient energy of travelers and truckers, her serenity struck him with the force of an unexpected blow. She listened, her gaze steady and unwavering, a mirror reflecting his own disingenuousness. The words that had once held power over her, the manipulative pleas for understanding, now dissolved into the ambient clatter of plates and distant highway rumble, rendered impotent by the clarity that had blossomed within her. In those few days on the road, cradled by the rhythmic thrum of Silas Thorne's cruiser and the vast, indifferent beauty of the passing landscape, Eleanor had found a truth that transcended the pain of betrayal. She had seen Nathaniel, truly seen him, not as the man she had loved, but as the man he was, a mirror of societal expectations, capable of love only when it fit within a pristine, unblemished frame. He had seen in her not a partner, but a limitation, a formidable burden, the unwieldy weight of an incomplete life. His compassion, she now understood, was a fragile thing, predicated on convenience, a conditional offering that crumbled under the slightest strain. He had sought to mend her, not to accept her, seeing her parched spirit as a flaw to be corrected rather than a landscape to be embraced. Silas, by contrast, had seen something entirely different. He saw not the chair, but the indomitable spirit that propelled it. He recognized the profound possibility embedded in her resilience, the raw strength of a soul unbowed by adversity. His gaze held no pity, only a quiet, steadfast acknowledgement of her inherent worth, a recognition that extended beyond the superficiality of physical form or social expectation. He hadn't offered to fix her. He had offered to ride with her, to stand beside her, a silent, unwavering pillar of support against the shifting sands of her fractured world. He had seen the nascent fire in her eyes, the dormant will that had been suffocated by grief and judgment, and had, through his unwavering presence, offered the oxygen it needed to burn. His actions were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate affirmations of dignity, of shared humanity, of a silent covenant forged in shared solitude. With a serenity that Nathaniel had never witnessed, a calm that belied the storm of her past, Eleanor extended her hand. In her palm, the engagement ring, the very one he had so casually discarded, glinted under the diner's fluorescent lights. It was not an offering of renewed commitment, but a definitive, resolute rejection. Her voice, though a mere whisper amidst the diner's hum, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. It was the final farewell, a quiet declaration of independence that resonated with more power than any shouted accusation. This ultimate refusal, delivered with grace and unshakable conviction, was a testament to her transformation, a profound shift from victim to architect of her own destiny. Nathaniel, confronted by the unyielding force of her newfound self, withered under the silent weight of her gaze. He had expected tears, pleas, an opportunity to play the magnanimous rescuer. Instead, he found an impenetrable wall of self-possession, a woman who had in his absence discovered her own formidable strength. The ring, now an empty symbol, was a silent witness to a love that had never truly understood the depths of its own commitment. His retreat from the diner was swifter, less theatrical than his initial abandonment, marked by the sting of genuine if self-inflicted defeat. The road, now their chosen path, stretched ahead, leading them away from the confines of judgment and into the grand, untamed landscapes of a land marked by rolling hills and vast open skies. They found solace in the anonymity of journey, in the rhythmic pulse of the motorcycle beneath them, each mile a physical and emotional distance from the community that had sought to define Eleanor by her limitations. Here, amidst the clean air and expansive horizons, they began to weave the fabric of a new life, one built not on societal expectations or convenient affections, but on the unshakable pillars of mutual respect, unspoken understanding and shared purpose. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of adversity, seasoned by the quiet companionship of the open road. Silas, carrying the heavy burden of a survivor's guilt, the ghost of conflicts past, the echoes of comrades lost, found in Eleanor a profound new direction for his deep-seated sense of responsibility. His experience as a naval combat engineer, once a source of internal turmoil, became the foundation for a new, meaningful path. He transitioned into becoming a consultant, a quiet guide for other military personnel, grappling with the unseen wounds of trauma and the daunting challenge of adapting to civilian life, especially those navigating physical disabilities. His gruff exterior belied a profound empathy, a capacity for understanding forged in the crucible of shared suffering. He understood the silent battles, the invisible scars, the systemic challenges that awaited those returning from the front lines. He channeled his own residual pain, his sense of obligation to those who hadn't made it back, into tangible, actionable support, providing a bridge between their past and a hopeful, if challenging, future. His knowledge of mechanical systems, of resilience under duress, now applied not just to machines, but to the intricate, often damaged human spirit. Eleanor Vance, drawing upon her former training in public health, a discipline focused on systemic well-being and community care, and illuminated by the stark, raw light of her personal experience with disability and abandonment, embarked on her own transformative mission. She founded the Veterans Support Framework, a non-profit organization dedicated to assisting former service members and their families in navigating the complexities of life with disabilities. Each success story her organization helped to forge, each veteran guided through the labyrinthine processes of adaptation and rehabilitation, became a silent validation of her mission, a resonant affirmation of her own journey. Her empathy was not theoretical. It was lived, breathed, and embodied in every fiber of her being. She understood the invisible walls that society erected, the subtle forms of exclusion, the profound psychological toll of a life irrevocably altered. Her work became an extension of herself, a powerful testament to the transformative potential of turning personal suffering into collective empowerment. She built a network of support, a community of understanding, an antidote to the isolation she had once so keenly felt. Her past trauma, once a source of profound humiliation, now served as an unparalleled wellspring of insight and compassion, enabling her to connect with others on a level that few could achieve. 6 months after their profound departure, a journey that had redefined the very contours of Eleanor's world, a quiet ceremony unfolded amidst the crisp, rarefied air of the Wyoming mountains. The vast, indifferent expanse of the landscape, once a symbol of the unknown, now felt like an embrace, a silent witness to their burgeoning connection. Their bond, forged not in shared history, but in a mutual recognition of spirit, had deepened with each passing mile, each silent understanding. Silas, the taciturn protector, watched Eleanor's confidence bloom, a vibrant, unexpected flower in the harsh mountain sun. He saw her engage with the complexities of her organization, her intellect sharp, her empathy boundless, and felt a quiet pride that resonated deeper than any battle honor. She, in turn, observed the subtle shifts in Silas, the way the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, the rare, genuine smile that softened the hard lines of his face when he spoke of a veteran he had helped, a new adaptation achieved. Their life together was a tapestry woven from small, consistent acts of loyalty and respect, each thread strengthening the whole. The wedding itself was an anomaly, a stark deviation from any traditional script, perfectly reflecting the unconventional path they had chosen. It was held outdoors, high in the mountains, under an immense sky that stretched endlessly, mirroring the boundless possibilities that now lay before them. The only altar was the rugged terrain, the only cathedral the whispering pines and the distant call of an eagle. It was a ceremony stripped bare of pretense, devoid of the social obligations and judgmental gazes that had once suffocated Eleanor. There were no white gowns, no polished pews, no hushed whispers of obligation. Instead, Eleanor wore simple, practical clothing that allowed her freedom of movement, her face alight with a serene joy that Nathaniel would never have recognized. Silas, in his worn leather vest, stood beside her, his hand a solid, comforting weight on her arm. The officiant was not a man of the cloth, but Tank, the burly, tattooed president of Silas's motorcycle club. Tank, a man whose presence usually commanded respect through sheer force, spoke with a surprising tenderness, his deep voice carrying across the mountain air as he invoked not scripture, but the inviolable codes of loyalty, honor, and mutual aid that governed their chosen family. His words, blunt and honest, resonated with a profound authenticity that was far more sacred than any formalized vow. Their new friends, the members of Silas's club, formed a rugged, unconventional congregation around them. These were men and women who lived by their own rules, who understood hardship and commitment not as abstract concepts, but as the lived reality of every day. Their faces, weathered by sun and wind, were etched with a quiet, genuine happiness for the couple, a silent acknowledgement of the strength that had brought these two disparate souls together. This union was not about societal conventions or the affirmation of an external world. It was about an unshakable bond forged in shared solitude, an understanding built on unspoken trust and an unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. Loyalty, that most precious and hard-won virtue, was the only currency that truly mattered here. The air hummed not with expectation, but with the quiet resonance of two people finding their true anchor in each other. Profound and simple truth, amidst the vastness of the wilderness. Eleanor, looking into Silas's deep blue eyes, saw not a rescuer, but a partner, a man who saw her, truly saw her, without condition or limitation. She felt a completeness, a sense of belonging that had been absent for far too long, a quiet peace that settled deep within her bones. The only ring exchanged was one of simple, unadorned silver, a symbol of their unpretentious, unwavering commitment. Over the next 2 years, their life together unfolded with a rhythm that was both organic and deliberate, a testament to the conscious choices they had made. Eleanor's confidence, once a fragile ember, had blossomed into a roaring flame. She had transformed from a woman defined by her paralysis into a powerful activist for disability rights, her voice clear, articulate, and imbued with the undeniable authority of lived experience. She navigated legislative halls and community meetings with a fierce grace, her wheelchair a symbol, not of limitation, but of resilience and progress. Her speeches resonated with a raw honesty, her insights cutting through bureaucratic jargon to the human core of every issue. She became a formidable advocate, dismantling barriers not just for veterans, but for all who faced similar struggles, proving that the most profound strength often emerges from the deepest vulnerabilities. Her past humiliation, once a crushing weight, now fueled her passion, providing an inexhaustible wellspring of empathy and understanding. She had found her purpose, not despite her circumstances, but because of them. Silas, too, had found his own equilibrium. His restless spirit, once driven by the ghosts of combat, had settled into a profound sense of purpose. He had slowed his pace, deliberately choosing a life that possessed weight, meaning, and a tangible impact. His consulting work expanded, reaching more veterans, offering practical guidance and emotional fortitude to those struggling to integrate back into a world that often failed to understand their sacrifices. He saw the systematic failures, the subtle ways veterans were left behind, and worked tirelessly to build bridges, to create pathways for healing and adaptation. He didn't offer easy answers, but hard-won truths, practical strategies, and the unwavering presence of someone who truly understood. His quiet strength was the anchor Eleanor needed, a constant, unwavering presence that allowed her to push her own boundaries, to take risks, to challenge the status quo without fear of falling. Their relationship was not one of dependence but of mutual empowerment, each lifting the other to greater heights. He was the quiet foundation, the steady hand, the silent listener, allowing Eleanor to soar. On the anniversary of their audacious escape from the confines of convention, Eleanor looked back, not with the sting of regret, but with a deep, profound wellspring of gratitude. The day Nathaniel had abandoned her, once marked as a tragedy, a monumental betrayal, was now recontextualized in the grand tapestry of her life. It was not an ending, but a clearing, an act of brutal grace that had created the essential space for the best possibilities. Without his cowardly retreat, she might never have discovered the depths of her own strength, the unwavering loyalty of Silas, or the profound purpose that now defined her existence. The universe, in its cruel wisdom, had cleared the path, severing a weak, conditional connection to make room for a bond built on granite. She understood now that some endings are merely necessary preconditions for truly magnificent beginnings. Her individual traumas, the brutal physical reshaping of her body, the searing pain of betrayal, the quiet humiliation of public judgment, and Silas's own heavy burden of survivor's guilt, the invisible scars of combat that he carried with quiet dignity, had not been mere misfortunes. They had been, she realized with astonishing clarity, the brutal, necessary preparations for the profound love and shared purpose they had finally found together. Their wounds, rather than crippling them, had sharpened their senses, deepened their empathy, and forged an unbreakable connection. They understood each other's unspoken pains, their shared resilience forming the bedrock of their partnership. They had not merely survived the storms that had buffeted their lives, they had, against all odds, mutually rescued each other, pulling each other from the wreckage of their individual pasts. Their story was a living testament to the truth that life's greatest adventures are not found in the comfortable conformity of the expected path, but in the courageous, often terrifying, choice to venture down the road less traveled. It was here, in the vast openness of the unknown, that true liberation lay, a vibrant, unscripted existence defined by unwavering loyalty, profound respect, and a love that saw beyond all superficialities, embracing the whole, beautifully scarred truth of each other. The mountains, silent and majestic, watched over them, guardians of a love as vast and enduring as the landscape itself. Eleanor learned to interpret the subtle language of Silas's actions, the quiet rituals he observed that spoke volumes where words failed, the way he meticulously checked her wheelchair before every outing, not as a chore, but as an act of protective foresight. The steady, comforting pressure of his hand on her shoulder during moments of public scrutiny, the silent nods of affirmation when she articulated a complex point in a meeting, a non-verbal praise that meant more than any spoken compliment. She saw in him the embodiment of relational competence, a man who understood the profound power of consistent, practical support. Their life was a continuous negotiation of boundaries and possibilities, not a static state. They established routines that honored both their needs, the early morning quiet over coffee, planning their day, reviewing strategies for the veteran support framework, the evening rides brief and exhilarating, allowing the wind to cleanse the day's weariness, the shared silence that was never empty, but full of understanding. She realized that healing was not an endpoint, but a continuous practice of vigilance and adaptation, a daily choice to lean into growth. The growth of the veteran support framework mirrored Eleanor's own journey. It wasn't just an organization, it was a living ecosystem of repair and empowerment. They developed innovative programs focused not just on physical rehabilitation, but on the equally crucial mental and emotional reintegration of veterans. Eleanor, with her public health background, designed protocols for identifying systemic barriers within communities and advocating for structural changes. Silas, leveraging his combat experience, led workshops on psychological resilience and practical adaptation, translating complex trauma into manageable coping mechanisms. They became a formidable team, a powerhouse of both lived experience and strategic insight. Their work was driven by a deep ethical commitment to create a world where no veteran felt abandoned, a stark contrast to Eleanor's own past. They championed the idea that vulnerability, when acknowledged and supported, could be a profound source of strength, not a weakness. Their shared mission transformed personal pain into a collective force for good, a testament to the idea that true redemption often lies in serving others. This mutual project, the intertwining of their individual expertise and compassion, was the engine of their continued emotional and spiritual development. They discussed complex ethical dilemmas late into the night, debated the most effective strategies for policy change, and celebrated every small victory, every veteran whose life they helped to transform. Their bond was cemented not by romantic cliches, but by the shared weight of their purpose, the profound satisfaction of meaningful work. Eleanor understood that the deepest love was often expressed not in grand declarations, but in the sustained effort of building a life of integrity and impact side by side. Silas, in turn, found a profound sense of peace in knowing that his experiences, once a source of isolated torment, now fueled a greater good. Guided by Eleanor's brilliant and empathetic vision, they had created a relationship that transcended typical romance, one built on a foundation of shared values, mutual respect, and a relentless pursuit of justice and well-being for others. Their love was a quiet, unyielding force, a constant presence that empowered them both to face the world with renewed strength and unshakable resolve. They were not merely partners, they were co-architects of a better world, a living example of how trauma, when properly acknowledged and processed, can be transmuted into profound purpose. The profound journey of Eleanor and Silas was not a linear ascent, but a continuous, often arduous navigation of human complexity. Their initial shared solitude had matured into a partnership built on a sophisticated understanding of relational dynamics, a tacit agreement to observe, to analyze, and to intervene with precision. Eleanor, now a seasoned architect of social change, understood that true empowerment meant more than just breaking free. It meant meticulously building new structures of support, new protocols for interaction that honored vulnerability while demanding agency. She had moved past the raw pain of Peter's abandonment to a place of detached analysis, seeing his retreat not as a personal flaw in herself, but as a predictable failure of a relational system under duress. His inability to adapt, his flight from overwhelming responsibility, was in retrospect a clear signal of his limited emotional bandwidth, a pattern she now recognized in the stories of countless veterans struggling with similar conditional support. Systems. She had learned to detect the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of evasion, the fractional pauses, the deflected gazes that spoke volumes without a single word. This vigilante competence, honed in her personal crucible, became a cornerstone of the veteran's support framework. She taught her team to look beyond stated intentions, to observe the micro-behaviors that revealed deeper truths about commitment and fear. Silas, too, refined his expertise. His work as a trauma consultant for military personnel was less about grand therapeutic gestures and more about practical, observable steps towards reintegration. He didn't preach about healing. He demonstrated it through structured processes. For a veteran struggling with hypervigilance, Silas might suggest a specific breathing rhythm, a precise method for scanning an environment, a ritualized check of their surroundings that brought control back to the individual. He understood that trauma fragments identity, and his role was to help rebuild it, piece by empirical piece. His own journey from the silent burden of survivor's guilt to the active pursuit of purpose was a living testament to the efficacy of these methods. He understood the insidious nature of unresolved guilt, the way it could fester and sabotage. He helped veterans to reframe their experiences, not as failures of courage, but as evidence of endurance, often through the simple yet profound act of listening without judgment and then offering concrete, actionable steps to move forward. He had learned, through Eleanor, that his stoicism was a strength, but his empathy, when actively applied, was a far greater force. Their life together was a choreography of respect and autonomy. Eleanor's mornings often began with deep analytical dives into policy documents, her sharp mind dissecting legislative language to find leverage points for change. Silas, meanwhile, would be out, visiting a veteran's family, checking on a new adaptation for a home, or leading a small focused group session on managing stress through structured routines. They converged in the evenings, not for escapism, but for a shared processing of the day's intellectual and emotional demands. These were not casual conversations, but intricate dialogues, where each would present observations, test hypotheses about human behavior, and collaboratively refine their strategies for impact. They explored the dualities inherent in their work. The same systems designed to protect could also confine. The same loyalty that bound a community could also isolate those who deviated. They understood that every solution carried its own set of challenges. Every victory required renewed vigilance. Eleanor, reflecting on her path, understood that her initial exclusion and abandonment had not merely been painful. They had been an education. The cold shoulder of the community, the quick retreat of her fiancé, had exposed the fragile architecture of conditional relationships. This understanding made her a more effective leader, capable of anticipating resistance, of designing support systems that were resilient to the inevitable ebb and flow of human empathy. She championed protocols for maintaining open communication, for establishing clear boundaries, and for ritualizing acts of care that prevented relational erosion. She saw the veterans' support framework as more than a service provider. It was an incubator for relational competence, a model for how communities could truly support their most vulnerable members without resorting to pity or short-sighted solutions. She knew that the comfort offered by Clara, while well-intentioned, was rooted in a desire for Eleanor to conform to a perceived fragility. Silas, conversely, had seen her inherent resilience and offered a path that honored her strength, not her perceived weakness. Their home, nestled in the vast expanse of Wyoming, became a quiet hub of intellectual and emotional growth. It was a space where The roar of Silas's cruiser outside mingled with the rhythmic click of Eleanor's fingers on her keyboard, where policy papers lay beside well-oiled wrench sets. They hosted small gatherings, not of socialites, but of fellow advocates, veterans, and community leaders who shared their commitment to building more resilient, empathetic societies. These were not parties but working sessions, infused with the quiet intensity of people dedicated to a cause. Eleanor's observation skills, her ability to read the subtle cues of discomfort or enthusiasm in a room, were invaluable. She could detect the unsaid anxieties, the unspoken questions, and address them with a calm authority that commanded respect. Silas, with his directness and unwavering moral compass, served as a grounding force, ensuring that their work remained rooted in practical reality, never straying too far into theoretical abstraction. One evening, as the last light bled from the mountain peaks, Eleanor and Silas sat by a crackling fire, the scent of pine smoke mingling with the crisp night air. Eleanor, tracing patterns on a worn leather journal, spoke of a veteran they had recently helped, a young man who had lost both legs in a roadside explosion and struggled with profound isolation. His wife, Eleanor mused, initially saw his condition as a burden, a permanent alteration of their future. But we didn't just give them access to a ramp. We helped them restructure their daily rituals, simple things, how they greeted each other in the morning, how they shared meal preparation, how they navigated social events. It wasn't about fixing him, but about re-architecting their relationship to accommodate a new reality, to find strength in adaptation. Silas nodded, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "It's about the small, consistent actions," he rumbled, his voice low. "The commitment to the process, not just the outcome." Peter, he couldn't commit to the process. He saw the outcome, your paralysis, as a permanent end, not a new beginning that required a new set of protocols. He paused, then continued. He failed the vigilance test. He didn't look for the signs of his own fear, the patterns of his own emotional flight. Eleanor appreciated his bluntness, his ability to strip away sentimentality and get to the operational truth of human behavior. Their discussions were often like this, an autopsy of relational failures and a blueprint for robust emotional structures. They understood that betrayal wasn't just a dramatic event. It was the culmination of 1,000 small unaddressed evasions, a failure of emotional vigilance. Their shared purpose was not a balm that erased their individual wounds, but a lens that helped them understand and transmute them. Eleanor's parched spirit had found an oasis, not in a romanticized rescue, but in the rigorous, satisfying work of building an organization that genuinely healed. Silas's survivor's guilt, once a solitary burden, was now channeled into a powerful engine for change, his empathy a finely tuned instrument for detecting and addressing the invisible wounds of others. They had learned that healing was not a destination, but a continuous practice of observation, adaptation, and unwavering commitment to a shared code of conduct. The road ahead, they knew, would always present new challenges, new patterns of abandonment, new needs for vigilant intervention. But now they faced it together, two formidable souls, each an expert in the art of enduring, of building, and of riding headlong into the unknown, not as a flight but as a deliberate and powerful choice. Their bond was a living testament to the fact that the greatest strength lay not in the absence of wounds, but in the profound wisdom gained from tending them, and in the courageous act of turning personal suffering into a collective force for good. They had moved beyond survival to an active, conscious creation of a life defined by purpose, dignity, and an unwavering, hard-won love. Their commitment was not to an idealized future, but to the tangible, consistent work of building a better present, day by day, mile by mile. They were not just a couple. They were a formidable force, meticulously constructing a world where no one was truly abandoned. The crisp mountain air, once a symbol of their hard-won freedom, now carried a subtle tremor of a new, unforeseen challenge. 2 years had passed since their wedding. 2 years of meticulous construction, of a life, an organization, and a bond forged in the fires of mutual purpose. The Veterans Support Framework had grown exponentially, its reach extending across state lines, a testament to Eleanor's strategic brilliance and Silas's unwavering practical application. They had built a formidable team, a network of dedicated individuals who, like them, had found purpose in service, transforming individual traumas into collective resilience. Eleanor, now a nationally recognized advocate, was preparing for a pivotal congressional hearing in Washington, D.C., a chance to push for systemic legislative changes that would redefine support for disabled veterans. This was the culmination of countless hours of research, policy drafting, and the relentless cultivation of allies. The stakes were immense. Success would mean not just individual victories, but a complete overhaul of outdated, often dehumanizing, bureaucratic processes. Silas, ever the quiet anchor, had meticulously planned their journey. It wasn't just a trip, it was a campaign, a logistical ballet designed to minimize Eleanor's physical strain and maximize her mental focus. He had outfitted their custom RV, a mobile command center, with every conceivable adaptation, ensuring her comfort and independence. His vigilance, honed by years of combat engineering and then by the subtle art of observing human patterns, was absolute. He charted routes that avoided unnecessary stress, managed every detail, from the exact temperature of her coffee to the precise timing of her medication. He knew that for Eleanor, every ounce of physical energy conserved was an ounce she could pour into the intellectual combat that awaited her. This was his silent battle, fought in the shadows, allowing her to shine in the light. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders, the faint lines around her eyes that appeared during late-night policy reviews. He understood that this fight, while intellectual, was also deeply personal, rooted in her own journey of exclusion and abandonment. His role was to create the unshakable foundation from which she could launch her most impactful assaults on injustice. However, the political landscape of D.C. was a labyrinth far more intricate and treacherous than any mountain trail. As they navigated the opulent, often superficial corridors of power, Eleanor encountered a new form of the same old exclusion. The establishment, a polished facade of smiles and platitudes, paid lip service to her cause while subtly undermining her authority. She, a woman in a wheelchair, a former paralytic widow who rode a motorcycle, was an anomaly, an inconvenient truth in a world built on pristine appearances. She felt the subtle shift in body language when she spoke, the polite but dismissive smiles, the lingering glances at her chair that always seemed to imply fragility or tokenism rather than strength or expertise. Her carefully crafted arguments, rooted in data and lived experience, were met with bureaucratic obfuscation and the insidious weapon of delay. She sensed the insidious resistance, the quiet efforts to push her to the periphery, to treat her passion as an emotional outburst rather than a strategic assault on systemic failures. The same patterns of subtle diminishment she had faced in her small town were now magnified on a national stage, cloaked in diplomatic language and veiled agendas. The central conflict quickly crystallized around a specific piece of legislation: the Veterans Holistic Integration Act. This bill, championed by Eleanor, sought to mandate comprehensive mental health services, adaptive housing, and employment support, moving beyond piecemeal solutions to a truly integrated framework. Its passage was crucial, a direct counter-narrative to the episodic, often humiliating, support veterans currently received. However, a powerful lobby, representing entrenched interests in the existing fragmented system, actively resisted, fearing the loss of their own lucrative contracts and influence. Their primary antagonist emerged in the form of Senator Richard Sterling, a charismatic but ruthlessly pragmatic politician who had, for years, cultivated an image as a champion of veterans while subtly diverting funds and resources to his own cronies. Sterling, a master of passive aggression, met Eleanor with a dazzling smile and an outstretched hand, yet his eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed a deeper agenda. He admired her passion, he declared, but argued for pragmatism, for incremental change, thinly veiled excuses for maintaining the profitable status quo. Eleanor, armed with her honed observational skills, detected the subtle tells in Sterling's demeanor. The quick, almost imperceptible flick of his gaze towards her wheelchair, a micro-expression of unease, quickly masked by a practiced smile. The way he would subtly shift his weight away from her during conversations, creating a fractional distance that spoke volumes about his psychological discomfort. She understood that his charm was a sophisticated defense mechanism, a ritualized performance designed to disarm and control. He didn't see her as an adversary to be crushed, but as a minor inconvenience to be skillfully managed, her emotion to be diffused. Her team, a collective of equally vigilant observers, began to document these micro-behaviors, building a comprehensive profile of his relational patterns, his evasion tactics, his subtle power plays, his consistent habit of framing legitimate demands as unrealistic expectations. They realized that fighting Sterling required more than just data. It required a precise understanding of his emotional architecture, his predictable patterns of manipulation. One particularly grueling day, after a series of unproductive meetings where Sterling had skillfully delayed and deflected, Eleanor felt a wave of profound fatigue. The physical demands of navigating the halls of power combined with the relentless psychological warfare began to wear on her. Back in their RV, she confessed to Silas, her voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "It's like Peter, all over again, Silas. Not the overt abandonment, but the subtle, insidious way they try to diminish you, to make you feel like your needs are too much, your reality too inconvenient." Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she poured a cup of tea. She understood now that the patterns of conditional support, of emotional flight from overwhelming responsibility, were not just personal failures, but systemic ones, replicated at every level of society. Silas, ever the quiet listener, simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's a different battlefield, Eleanor," he rumbled, his voice a low, steadying presence. "But the enemy's tactics are the same. They want to wear you down, to make you doubt your own vigilance. You saw Peter for what he was. You'll see Sterling for what he is too. His smile is a smokescreen. His words are designed to create distance, not connection. We need to find his back entrance, his point of retreat, just like Peter had in that workshop." His words were not empty reassurances. They were a strategic analysis, a reminder of the protocols they had both learned in different contexts of struggle. He knew that Eleanor's greatest strength was her ability to detect patterns, to apply her lived experience as a diagnostic tool. This was not about personal revenge, but about dismantling a corrupt system that mirrored her own past traumas, albeit on a grander scale. The revelation of this systemic connection between personal abandonment and political obfuscation invigorated Eleanor. She realized that her personal trauma was not a weakness, but a potent source of insight. She began to reframe her approach, moving beyond purely logical arguments to expose the emotional and moral failures embedded within Sterling's pragmatism. She prepared a powerful, unscripted testimony for the upcoming hearing, drawing not just on statistics, but on the raw, unvarnished stories of veterans whose lives had been irrevocably damaged by the very policies Sterling defended. She intended to make the abstract concrete, to force the committee to confront the human cost of their political maneuverings. Her words would be precise, her emotional delivery controlled, yet infused with the undeniable authority of someone who had walked through the fire and emerged with an unshakable moral compass. Silas, meanwhile, began his own parallel investigation. He knew that politicians like Sterling often had hidden vulnerabilities, secret back entrances of their own. Leveraging his club connections, a network that stretched far beyond the confines of their small Wyoming community, he started to dig. He didn't seek scandal for scandal's sake, but patterns of inconsistency, of hypocrisy, that would expose Sterling's true character and undermine his carefully constructed public image. He focused on Sterling's claims of supporting veterans, cross-referencing public records with whispers from his own network, discrepancies in funding allocation, questionable contracts awarded to shell corporations, subtle diversions of resources intended for disabled veterans into less transparent channels. This was not brute force, but surgical precision, a methodical dismantling of a corrupt edifice. He understood that sometimes the most effective way to protect those you care about is to expose the darkness that threatens them, not with a roar, but with a quiet, undeniable accumulation of inconvenient truths. The tension in D.C. reached a fever pitch as the hearing date approached. Eleanor and Silas, a formidable duo, moved with a synchronized purpose. Eleanor honed her testimony, her voice becoming a finely tuned instrument of truth, each word chosen for maximum impact. She rehearsed not just the facts, but the emotional cadence, the pauses that would allow her words to sink in, to challenge the comfortable narratives of the committee members. She understood that this was not merely a debate, it was a moral confrontation, a demand for accountability that transcended partisan lines. Silas, his face a mask of quiet determination, worked relentlessly behind the scenes, sifting through data, verifying sources, connecting disparate pieces of information that began to paint a damning picture of Senator Sterling's true commitment to veterans. He uncovered a pattern of delayed funding to a specific rehabilitation center, a facility Sterling publicly championed, while simultaneously diverting significant contributions from defense contractors who profited from the very fragmented system Eleanor sought to dismantle. It was a subtle yet undeniable web of self-interest and moral compromise. The night before the hearing, Eleanor found a moment of quiet solitude in the RV, the hum of its systems, a comforting drone. She reflected on her journey from the EICO sterile hospital room to the bustling political arena. She understood that her initial choice to ride away with Silas was not just a personal act of defiance, but a profound commitment to a life of authenticity, a life defined by unwavering vigilance against all forms of abandonment, be they personal or systemic. Her physical vulnerability had become a source of unexpected strength, a constant reminder of the human cost of neglect. She closed her eyes, picturing the faces of the veterans she had helped, the subtle shifts in their demeanors as they moved from despair to empowered agency. Their stories and her own were the fuel for her fight, the unshakable foundation for the confrontation that awaited her. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every individual whose dignity had been compromised, whose needs had been deemed overwhelming responsibility by those in power. She was ready. The culmination of her journey, from personal humiliation to public advocacy, was about to unfold. She was not just a paralytic widow. She was an architect of change, a warrior of truth, and a testament to the transformative power of a spirit that refused to be silenced or abandoned. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and sharp, a stark reflection of the atmosphere awaiting them inside the congressional building. Eleanor, meticulously dressed in tailored clothing that projected authority and competence, felt a focused calm settle over her. Her wheelchair, usually a reminder of her altered state, now felt like an extension of her will, a silent testament to her enduring strength. Silas, stoic and vigilant, navigated the bustling corridors, his presence a silent shield against the curious glances and hushed whispers. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to hostile environments, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing, anticipating. Every detail, from the precise path to the hearing room to the timing of their arrival, had been calculated to afford Eleanor maximum psychological advantage. He knew the fight she was about to embark upon was not merely political, it was a deeply moral one, a confrontation with the very systems that had, in different guises, once attempted to diminish her. His own investigation had yielded fragments, unsettling patterns of financial irregularity tied to Sterling's seemingly impeccable record, but nothing conclusive enough for a public broadside. Yet, the hearing room was a crucible of expectation. Television cameras hummed softly, and the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, stale coffee, and latent power struggles. Committee members, a mix of seasoned politicians and new faces, sat in their elevated seats, their expressions a carefully calibrated blend of gravitas and veiled interest. Senator Sterling, resplendent in a meticulously tailored suit, occupied the seat closest to the witness stand, his smile radiating an almost artificial warmth, his gaze occasionally drifting to Eleanor with a paternalistic concern that grated on her nerves. She felt the weight of history in that room, the countless voices of the unheard, the veterans whose pleas had been lost in the bureaucratic maze. Her own experience of abandonment, of being deemed overwhelming responsibility, fueled a quiet fire within her, a resolve to make their suffering undeniably visible. As Eleanor was introduced, her gaze swept across the room, settling briefly on Sterling. His smile tightened almost. Imperceptibly, a fleeting micro-expression of apprehension quickly masked. This small tremor of unease was a victory in itself, a testament to her growing ability to detect the subtle tells of insincerity. She took her place at the witness stand, her hands resting calmly on the polished wood. Her opening statement, concise and data-driven, laid out the systemic failures of existing veteran support programs. She spoke of fragmented services, of a lack of integrated mental health care, of housing, initiatives that barely scratch the surface of need. Her voice, clear and resonant, carried an undeniable authority, the quiet strength of lived experience amplified by years of meticulous advocacy. She presented charts and graphs, cold, hard data points that painted a grim picture of neglect and inefficiency. She highlighted the spiraling rates of veteran homelessness, the alarming statistics on mental health crises, the bureaucratic hurdles that turned even simple requests for aid into a demoralizing odyssey. Then she shifted. "But behind these numbers," Eleanor began, her voice softening slightly, yet gaining a new, profound intensity, "are lives. Are men and women who, like me, once believed in unwavering commitment, in codes of honor that should apply not just on the battlefield, but in the halls of power, in the hearts of communities that promised to support them upon their return." Her words, carefully chosen, resonated with an emotional truth that transcended the sterile confines of policy debate. She spoke of the emotional cost of being seen as a burden, of the psychological impact of having one's needs dismissed as too much responsibility. She didn't explicitly name Peter, but the echoes of his abandonment, of her public humiliation, infused her words with a raw, undeniable authenticity. She spoke of the silent suffering, the dignity stripped away not by injury, but by indifference. She cited cases, nameless but vivid, of veterans struggling with invisible wounds. Their cries for help met with bureaucratic forms and long waiting lists, their spirits slowly corroding under the weight of systemic neglect. Senator Sterling, ever the seasoned politician, interjected with a practiced politeness, attempting to steer the narrative back to his preferred discourse of pragmatism and budgetary constraints. "Ms. Vance, while your passion is admirable, we must consider the financial realities," he stated, his voice smooth as silk, yet carrying the subtle undertone of condescension. "The Veterans Holistic Integration Act is ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for our current economic climate. Incremental change, I believe, is the more responsible path." His words were designed to trivialize her demands, to frame her as an idealist out of touch with political realities, to undermine her authority by implicitly questioning her rationality. He maintained his composed smile, a shield against her emotional resonance, his eyes darting to the media, subtly playing to the cameras. He was employing the same tactics of subtle diminishment she had faced in the workshop, cloaked now in the grander, more sophisticated language of statecraft. But Eleanor was prepared for this. She met his gaze directly, her eyes unwavering. "Senator," she replied, her voice firm, "what is the financial reality of a veteran choosing homelessness over a system that repeatedly fails them? What is the economic cost of a life lost to preventable suicide? What is the moral burden of promising unwavering support to those who sacrifice everything, only to deem their needs too overwhelming when they return?" She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air, sharp and unyielding. "I understand pragmatism, Senator. I understand responsibility. But when these terms are used to justify neglect, to perpetuate a fragmented system that profits from suffering, then they cease to be virtues and become excuses." She then, with a controlled anger that vibrated beneath her words, began to detail specific instances of how current policies, championed by men like Sterling, actively contributed to the very problems they claimed to address. She produced documented evidence of funds earmarked for veteran support being diverted to contractors with dubious track records, companies with direct financial ties to members of the committee, carefully avoiding direct accusation, but presenting an undeniable pattern of questionable allocation. The room stirred. The murmurs grew louder, no longer whispers of polite deference but notes of genuine unease. Eleanor had meticulously built her case, each piece of evidence a brick in a wall of irrefutable truth. She presented a series of email exchanges, anonymized but verifiable, showing how proposals for integrated care had been systematically delayed, rewrote, or buried under layers of bureaucracy by Sterling's office. She highlighted the discrepancies Silas had quietly unearthed. A specific rehabilitation center, publicly lauded by Sterling, had experienced significant unexplained funding cuts even as the Senator's Political Action Committee received substantial donations from companies that stood to benefit from the fragmented and less efficient alternative programs. It was a subtle, insidious betrayal, a systemic abandonment dressed in the guise of fiscal responsibility. She pointed to specific clauses in the proposed Veterans Holistic Integration Act that would close these loopholes, mandate transparency, and ensure funds reached their intended beneficiaries. She made it impossible to ignore the systemic corruption that flourished under the guise of pragmatism. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. It was Silas. He hadn't been called to testify, but his presence in the back of the room, tall and imposing, had been a constant. Now he approached the committee clerk's desk, a thick-bound dossier in his hand. He placed it down with a quiet thud that resonated through the suddenly silent room. "Excuse me, Mr. Chairman," Silas rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to Eleanor's articulate precision. "While Ms. Vance has presented the ethical and operational failures of the current system, I believe there are certain financial patterns that further illuminate Senator Sterling's definition of pragmatism." His eyes, piercing blue, locked onto Sterling's, challenging the practiced composure that was beginning to crack. Sterling's face, for the first time, lost its practiced mask. A flash of genuine panic flickered across his eyes. He rose quickly, slamming his hand on the table. "I object, Mr. Chairman. This is completely out of order. This man has no standing here." His voice, usually smooth, was now laced with an edge of desperation. The carefully constructed facade of the unflappable politician began to crumble under the unexpected pressure. His indignation felt less like genuine outrage and more like a desperate attempt to shut down an uncomfortable truth. He was losing control of the narrative, and the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of his emotional flight were now becoming overt. The chairman, visibly flustered by the sudden turn of events and the presence of the formidable biker, hesitated. The cameras, sensing the shift in dynamic, swiveled toward Silas, then to Sterling, capturing the raw, unscripted drama. "Mr. Thorne," the chairman began, "you are not a scheduled witness." Silas held the chairman's gaze, unblinking. "No, sir, but the information contained within this dossier directly pertains to the integrity of this committee, the efficacy of veteran support, and the specific financial interests of Senator Sterling regarding the very bill being discussed." He gestured to the dossier. "It details a pattern of financial transactions, including delayed payments to the Hope's Haven Rehabilitation Center, a facility publicly championed by the senator, while significant campaign contributions from Armor Corp Solutions, a company benefiting directly from current fragmented aid structures, flowed directly into his re-election campaign account. This isn't just a lapse in judgment, Mr. Chairman. This is a pattern of calculated self-interest at the expense of our veterans." He was naming names, detailing transactions, providing the concrete evidence that Eleanor's ethical and systemic arguments had needed to become undeniable. The silence in the room was absolute, punctuated only by the whirring of the cameras. Eleanor watched, a profound sense of awe and a quiet, burning satisfaction filling her. This was Silas's method, his precise intervention, his unwavering loyalty. He hadn't just stood by her. He had actively dismantled the very mechanisms of deception that mirrored her own past traumas. The cold, hard facts Silas presented, combined with Eleanor's visceral testimony, created an undeniable synergy. Sterling's carefully crafted image, his entire political career built on a foundation of veiled self-interest, was exposed in that moment. His pragmatism was revealed as calculated opportunism, his concern for veterans a cynical ploy. He was not just an antagonist, he was a mirror of Peter's fundamental flaw, magnified by the power of his office, the inability to genuinely commit, to prioritize true responsibility over personal gain, to see people as anything other than means to an end. The revelation of this blatant hypocrisy, delivered with such quiet authority, by Silas, a man who represented an entirely different code of honor, sent shockwaves through the committee. The chairman, now visibly agitated, called for an immediate recess. Sterling, his face pale and contorted, began to stammer, attempting to dismiss the claims as unfounded slander and political attacks. But his words lacked conviction, his usual composure utterly shattered. He looked cornered, like an animal caught in a trap, his eyes darting wildly, seeking an escape, a back entrance. That wasn't there. This was the moment of reckoning, the point of no return. Eleanor's personal journey from abandonment had converged with Silas's quiet, meticulous justice, culminating in a public unveiling of systemic betrayal. The abstract concepts of pragmatism and responsibility that Sterling had used to justify his actions now lay shattered, replaced by the stark, undeniable truth of his moral bankruptcy. The room buzzed with a chaotic energy, the polite facade of political discourse ripped away to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom. The gavel of the chairman slammed down, a sharp crack that barely pierced the sudden, chaotic murmurings of the room. Journalists, their faces alight with the scent of scandal, scrambled for position, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Senator Sterling, his face a mask of disbelieving fury and raw fear, stammered, attempting to regain control, but his words were lost in the rising tide of speculation and accusation. His attempt to discredit Silas, to paint him as an unruly outsider, backfired spectacularly, only serving to highlight the stark contrast between his polished deceit and Silas's blunt, undeniable truth. The dossier, now being rapidly distributed by the clerk, contained not mere allegations, but irrefutable financial records. Bank statements, anonymized but traceable invoices, and internal communications that explicitly detailed Sterling's financial ties to Armor Corp Solutions and the strategic defunding of Hope's Haven. It revealed a pattern of calculated malfeasance, a deliberate design to enrich himself and his allies at the direct expense of the very veterans he claimed to protect. Eleanor watched Sterling's disintegration with a profound, almost clinical detachment. The man who had sought to diminish her, to dismiss her lived experience as mere passion, was now experiencing his own public humiliation, a reckoning brought about by his own moral bankruptcy. There was no joy in her observation, only the quiet, hard-won satisfaction of justice unfolding. She recognized the precise architecture of his downfall, a failure of vigilance, an assumption of unquestioned power, a belief that his carefully constructed facade was impenetrable. He had neglected to foresee the emergence of an unforeseen variable, an unyielding, paralytic widow and a silent, steadfast biker, both experts in detecting patterns of deceit and confronting systemic abandonment. His back entrance, the quiet alley of his illicit dealings, had been exposed not by a dramatic explosion, but by the methodical, unblinking investigation of a man who understood the value of meticulous preparation and an unwavering code of honor. This was not vengeance. It was the inevitable consequence of a relational system corrupted by self-interest, finally brought to account. The silence of the room, once filled with his placid condescension, was now dominated by the undeniable hum of his unraveling career. In the days that followed, the fallout from the hearing was swift and brutal. The media, fueled by Silas's incontrovertible evidence and Eleanor's compelling testimony, launched a relentless investigation into Senator Sterling's financial dealings. His carefully cultivated image as a champion of veterans evaporated, replaced by headlines screaming corruption and betrayal. The very pragmatism he championed was now revealed as a thinly veiled excuse for greed. Public outrage swelled, amplified by the stories of veterans who came forward, emboldened by Eleanor's courage to share their own experiences of systemic neglect and deliberate defunding. The political establishment, sensing the shift in public sentiment and the undeniable weight of the evidence, moved quickly to distance themselves from Sterling. The Veterans Holistic Integration Act, once deemed too ambitious, now gained unprecedented traction, its passage suddenly appearing not just possible but inevitable. The system, resistant to change, had finally encountered a force it could not simply deflect or diminish. For Eleanor and Silas, the victory was not an end, but a new beginning, a profound affirmation of their shared purpose. They retreated from the immediate media frenzy, finding solace and renewal in the quiet expanse of their Wyoming home. Eleanor spent hours processing the events, not dwelling on the past, but meticulously analyzing the dynamics that had led to their success. She understood that Sterling's fall was not due to a single dramatic act, but to a continuous failure of emotional and ethical vigilance, a systematic disengagement from the true needs of those he ostensibly served. His patterns of evasion, his attempts to frame legitimate demands as overwhelming responsibility, were precisely the indicators of relational fragility that she and Silas now sought to counter in their work. This was the practical application of their evolving expertise, observing the micro-behaviors, detecting the systemic flaws, and then intervening with surgical precision. The Veterans Support Framework experienced a massive influx of support and funding, a direct result of the congressional hearing and Eleanor's heightened visibility. What had once been a grassroots organization was now poised to become a national force for change. Eleanor, with her public health background, meticulously redesigned their protocols, ensuring that the new funding translated into tangible, measurable improvements in veterans' lives. She focused on creating programs that built relational competence, teaching veterans and their families to identify patterns of conditional support, to establish healthy boundaries, and to advocate for their own needs with clarity and dignity. She knew that true healing was not a passive reception of aid, but an active, vigilant engagement with one's own well-being and relational environment. Her own journey, from the silent humiliation of abandonment to the commanding presence in the halls of power, was the living embodiment of this principle. She ensured that the organization's mission extended beyond physical rehabilitation, delving deep into the emotional and psychological architecture of reintegration, fostering a sense of belonging and agency that counteracted the insidious effects of societal exclusion. Silas, too, found his role transformed. His quiet, methodical investigation had exposed the vulnerability of even the most powerful. He became an invaluable asset to the Veterans Support Framework, not just as a consultant, but as a strategic advisor, leveraging his network and his unparalleled observational skills to identify systemic vulnerabilities and predict potential resistance. He led workshops on vigilance and adaptation, teaching veterans to read the subtle cues of their environments, to detect patterns of manipulation, and to build resilient personal and communal support systems. He emphasized that true strength lay not in brute force, but in the disciplined application of awareness, in the unwavering commitment to a code of ethics that transcended personal convenience. His past guilt, once a solitary burden, was now transmuted into a powerful, actionable commitment to justice, a quiet determination to ensure that no veteran felt the profound sting of abandonment he had witnessed Eleanor endure. He showed them how to identify their own back entrances, the vulnerabilities they left unaddressed, and how to fortify them through conscious, consistent practice. Their relationship deepened further, moving beyond the initial spark of defiance and mutual respect to a profound, intertwined purpose. They were a formidable team, each providing the other with what they needed to thrive. Eleanor's sharp intellect and unwavering moral compass found its perfect complement in Silas's grounded pragmatism and unyielding loyalty. Their nightly conversations, once intellectual dissections of societal flaws, now often included reflections on the ethical implications of their growing power, the responsibility that came with their influence. They understood that true leadership wasn't about imposing solutions, but about empowering others to find their own agency, to develop their own relational competence. Their love was not a tempestuous romance, but a steady, unyielding force, a shared commitment to building a more just and empathetic world. One deliberate, conscious act at a time. The roar of Silas's motorcycle, once a symbol of wild freedom, now became the steady pulse of a journey towards collective liberation, a journey they undertook together, side by side, vigilant and unbound. Eleanor's journey had culminated in a profound redefinition of home. It was no longer a physical space tied to past betrayals, but a dynamic construct built upon the unwavering foundations of mutual respect, shared purpose, and absolute integrity. She had learned that the most critical structures were not made of brick and mortar, but of meticulously maintained relational bonds, sustained by continuous vigilance and empathetic action. Her initial vulnerability, the very source of her public humiliation, had become the wellspring of her most profound strength, allowing her to connect with others on a level that politicians like Sterling could never comprehend. She often reflected on Peter's abandonment, not with bitterness, but with a detached, analytical clarity. He had been a diagnostic tool, a living example of the very patterns of conditional support she now worked to dismantle. His flight had created the void, the essential space into which Silas, with his unyielding code of honor, had stepped. This was not a romanticized rescue, but a sophisticated process of selection, a recognition of genuine compatibility in the crucible of adversity. The Veterans Holistic Integration Act passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support, a testament to the undeniable truth Eleanor and Silas had laid bare. It was a landmark piece of legislation mandating comprehensive, integrated care and establishing rigorous oversight to prevent the very financial abuses Sterling had exploited. This victory was not just a legislative triumph, it was a moral one, a societal shift acknowledging that caring for those who served was not an overwhelming responsibility, but an ethical imperative, a core component of a healthy community. Eleanor found herself increasingly sought after, not just as an activist but as a speaker, an educator, her narrative a powerful testament to resilience and strategic agency. She always emphasized that her transformation wasn't magical, but a result of conscious decisions, of meticulous observation, and of building a support system rooted in authentic, reciprocal commitment. 2 years after the hearing, the Veterans Support Framework had established regional centers across the country, each operating with the same core principles of relational competence and vigilant support. Eleanor, still at the helm, continued to refine their methods, integrating new insights from psychology and sociology to create truly holistic models of care. Silas, her constant anchor and strategic partner, oversaw the expansion, ensuring that the practical application of their mission remained true to its ethical core. His work with military personnel expanded to include training for first responders and community leaders, teaching them to identify and address the subtle signs of trauma and burnout, to build resilient support networks that prevented the insidious creep of isolation. He focused on measurable outcomes, on the tangible rituals of connection and care that forged unbreakable bonds within communities. Their individual traumas, once solitary burdens, had indeed become the brutal and necessary preparations for a profound love and an even profounder shared purpose. They had not merely survived, they had against all odds mutually rescued each other, creating a new paradigm for what it meant to be strong, to be loved, and to live a life of unwavering impact. Their journey, a testament to courage and conviction, proved that the greatest adventures lie not in the comfortable conformity of the path well trodden, but in the daring choice to ride, side by side, into the wild, untamed expanse of a purpose-driven life. The mountains of Wyoming, silent and majestic, continued to bear witness, guardians of a love and a legacy as vast and enduring as the landscape itself. Eleanor and Silas continued to thrive, their lives a living testament to their hard-won wisdom. Their bond, resilient and deeply rooted, served as a constant reminder that true connection was built on the meticulous care of shared understanding and an unwavering commitment to each other's growth. They had created a sanctuary, not from the world, but within it, a space where vulnerability was met with support and challenges were approached with collaborative strength. Their story, whispered in veterans' halls and boardrooms alike, became a beacon of hope, a powerful narrative of how the profoundest betrayals could, with courageous vigilance and a commitment to relational integrity, forge the path to the most authentic and impactful lives. They had proven that sometimes the greatest act of love is the refusal to be abandoned and the willingness to ride unflinchingly into the unknown with someone who truly sees and honors your unwavering spirit. If you've ever found strength in an unexpected connection or turned a personal challenge into a powerful purpose, share your story below. Let's build a community where every journey of empowerment, every narrative of resilience finds its voice. The years that followed the passage of the Veterans Holistic Integration Act were not a tranquil epilogue, but a sustained, vigorous chapter of building and refining. Eleanor Vance, now not merely an advocate but a legislative architect, understood that policy was only as effective as its implementation, and that implementation was a constant battle against inertia and subtle resistance. She approached this new phase with the same meticulous vigilance that had defined her personal journey. Her leadership of the Veterans Support Framework evolved transforming it into a robust, adaptable institution, a living counter-narrative to the systemic failures she and Silas had exposed. She ensured that the organization's new influx of funding was not merely spent, but strategically invested in programs that fostered authentic relational competence and enduring psychological resilience. Eleanor's mornings were still dedicated to the rigorous analysis of data, but now it was the data of success and adaptation, tracking the rates of successful reintegration, the measurable improvements in mental health, the reduction in veteran homelessness. She meticulously designed feedback loops, ensuring that every program was continuously evaluated and refined, a testament to her belief that true impact required constant, intelligent adaptation, not static solutions. Silas, her unwavering partner, had seamlessly transitioned from silent protector to indispensable strategist. His unique expertise in detecting patterns, honed in combat zones and refined in the political arena, was now invaluable in the everyday operations of the Veteran Support Framework. He worked closely with regional directors, developing training modules that taught staff to identify the subtle signs of relational distress, the micro-behaviors that indicated a veteran might be struggling with feelings of abandonment or isolation. He taught them to observe beyond explicit complaints, to look for the hesitations, the averted gazes, the unspoken anxieties that often preceded a crisis. His workshops on vigilance and adaptation became legendary within the organization, equipping frontline staff with practical tools for empathetic intervention. He understood that many veterans, having experienced profound betrayals, be they from the trauma of war or the failure of support systems back home, carried a deep-seated distrust. Silas's presence, his quiet authority, and his unyielding commitment helped to rebuild that trust, one consistent, honest interaction at a time. He emphasized that genuine care wasn't about sentimental gestures, but about predictable, unwavering presence and actionable support. He taught staff to identify and reinforce the rituals of connection, the small, consistent behaviors that anchored veterans within their new communities and fostered a sense of belonging. Their home in Wyoming, once a refuge from judgment, had become a vibrant hub of intellectual exchange and purposeful action. It was not uncommon for federal policy advisors, leading psychologists, and grizzled veteran outreach workers to converge there, drawn by Eleanor's incisive intellect and Silas's grounded wisdom. Their living room, usually filled with the comfortable silence of their shared companionship, now buzzed with intense discussions about systemic change, ethical leadership, and the nuanced art of building resilient communities. Eleanor, always observing, would notice the subtle power dynamics in these gatherings, the unspoken assumptions, the fractional pauses that revealed underlying biases. She facilitated discussions with a practiced grace, guiding conversations away from abstract platitudes towards concrete, actionable strategies. Silas, often on the periphery, would interject with a blunt, clarifying question, cutting through academic jargon to the operational truth, ensuring that every proposed solution was rooted in practical reality and the lived experience of those it aimed to serve. Their shared life, rather than becoming complacent in success, deepened into a profound exploration of human potential and the enduring nature of purposeful love. Eleanor found endless satisfaction in witnessing the tangible results of their work. A veteran finding stable housing after years of homelessness, a family reconnecting after the psychological scars of war had driven them apart, an individual reclaiming their agency after being told their limitations were insurmountable. Each success was a validation, not just of her mission, but of her core belief that vulnerability, when met with unwavering support, could be transmuted into unparalleled strength. She understood that her own journey, from the sterile confines of her paralysis and the crushing humiliation of abandonment to her position as a national leader, was a testament to this very principle. She often reflected that Peter's flight had, in its own cruel way, created the necessary void for Silas to enter, a void that had allowed her to truly redefine what love and commitment meant, stripped bare of superficial expectations. She recognized the profound ethical responsibility that came with their influence. A vigilance to ensure their own success never led to the same patterns of selective support or unacknowledged needs they had fought to dismantle. Silas, in turn, found a quiet, profound redemption in this shared enterprise. The guilt he carried from his combat days, once a solitary and corrosive burden, was now channeled into a relentless, compassionate drive to prevent others from experiencing similar forms of abandonment. He saw himself not as a savior, but as a facilitator, a man whose unique skill set allowed him to build the bridges that others could then cross. His motorcycle, once a symbol of his solitary wanderings, now represented the freedom they both championed, a freedom rooted in autonomy, purpose, and the unwavering support of a chosen family. He taught veterans that vigilance wasn't just about detecting external threats, but about understanding and fortifying their internal emotional landscapes, learning to recognize the patterns of their own vulnerabilities, and actively choosing pathways of resilience. His observations of Eleanor's journey had taught him that the deepest forms of courage often manifested not in grand battles, but in the consistent, day-by-day effort of rebuilding, of adapting, and of maintaining the fragile yet powerful architecture of human connection. He was her steadfast anchor, allowing her to soar, while she, in turn, was his compass, guiding his formidable strength towards the most impactful and ethical applications. Their love was a testament not to a storybook romance, but to the enduring power of a partnership built on shared values, intellectual curiosity, and an unshakable commitment to justice. It was a love that understood the nuanced language of observation, the precise timing of intervention, and the profound satisfaction of turning personal wounds into a collective force for good. They continued to ride together, not as an escape, but as an affirmation, the roar of the cruiser, a rhythmic pulse of a life lived with unwavering purpose, a deliberate choice to meet the unknown, not with fear, but with the quiet, formidable strength of two souls utterly bound by respect, integrity, and a fierce, unyielding commitment to leaving no one behind. They understood that the journey of healing and transformation was eternal, demanding continuous vigilance, constant adaptation, and an unwavering commitment to the principles they now embodied. Their greatest triumph wasn't just in changing laws, but in meticulously, consistently, and empathetically changing lives, proving that even the most profound betrayals can forge the path to the most authentic and impactful lives, sustained by a love that sees, truly sees, beyond all superficialities and embraces the raw, powerful truth of each other. The mountains of Wyoming, silent and majestic, continued to bear witness, guardians of a love and a legacy as vast and enduring as the landscape itself, a love that understood that true freedom was found, not in isolation, but in the deep, resonant connection of two souls committed to building a better world, one vigilant, purposeful act at a time.